So by 1813, the Constable brothers had laid out land plots here in this area. And as a result of that, the newly settled citizens here bestowed the honor of these two brothers of naming this town. They thought of their old home in England, which was called Brighton. Well, the new settlers said, why don't you name it New Brighton? Hence the name of the town, New Brighton, as we are on the main drag right now, as what this video is about. The borough of New Brighton, incorporated by then in 1838. New Brighton is a river town, and like most of the river towns, it gave rise to the industry and commerce that was prevalent to its predecessor and sister, which is Beaver Falls. And as I explained earlier in that video, Beaver Falls settled by James Patterson. James Patterson also had some doings here that would benefit the citizens of New Brighton by donating special land grants and plots for businesses to establish and flourish. Now imagine this main street here, way back in the early 1800s, full of life and busyness and horses and buggies and carriages, oxen, all kinds of people going up and down, just as I'm driving right now, and going to their places of business and selling goods and exchanging ideas and business transactions, going all over the place, as we do now today. I'm going to get off the main drag here for a minute, and I'm just going to go down and show you parts of the town. One of the earliest industries that made a marking here, primarily because of the waterways, was brick. And if you can see over here, the Beaver River's over there. The canals in New Brighton established transportation modes very early on in this town. And as I said earlier, as a result of that, New Brighton became very expansive quite quickly because of what it had to offer. There's your food land in New Brighton, ladies and gentlemen. It is still there. And when these businesses were established, brick yards in New Brighton, somewhere near Oak Hill, according to the Reverend Bosman in his Beaver County history, which is a vital source of information for local historians. Oh, look, ladies and gentlemen, the Merrick Art Gallery. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you go there and pay yourself a visit. You won't regret it. And Bosman says that the brickyard here was around in these parts as early as 1830. Subsequently, several brickyards made their way here in New Brighton. The town of Darlington is not the only place in Beaver County that was a competitive arsenal for bricklaying and brickyards and brick construction. New Brighton also played a major role in that. Ah, look at this. Here is a landmark. Roslyn Candies, huh? I sure wish it was open, because if it was, I would certainly go in there and get some candy, some chocolate. Anyway, let's take a back drop here and go again through the main drag. But if you notice the architecture, ladies and gentlemen, of these old beautiful homes in New Brighton, just look at this on both sides of me here. Huh? Look at that. Isn't that splendid? Look at that across the street. Just look at that house. Reminds you of colonial Massachusetts, somewhere near the bay. So not only was New Brighton such a strategic town for businesses and canals and waterways, the canal passages and routes that went through here also powered many of the industries here by water, of course, in those early days before electricity came into prominence in Beaver County. And that was why it was inevitable that so many businesses would be established here. However, one thing that is clearly undermined in my view, especially in the history of New Brighton, is the contribution of education. New Brighton was home to many, many schools, ladies and gentlemen. The first schoolhouse was settled in 1835 here in this town. New Brighton was also home to the women's seminaries, where they would study religion, classical learning, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, mathematics, sciences, theology, English language and literature. These institutions here in New Brighton flourished throughout the early 19th and 20th centuries. Places like the Beaver County Institute in New Brighton, who James Patterson, the founder of Patterson Heights and Patterson Township, was its first president. You had the New Brighton Theological Seminaries. You had the New Brighton Female Seminaries. There were quite a few institutions of higher learning. You might call this the Ivy League of Beaver County, if you will. Even when Aliquippa, at its height, had 12 schools. Yes, that's definitely something to make mention of, but New Brighton, ladies and gentlemen, was way ahead of the game. Many, probably perhaps 100, 200 years before the rest of Beaver County was intact. New Brighton was already establishing schools and churches and places of employment and business establishments and banks, commerce, very much like its sister Beaver Falls, which of course the two were connected at that time. Beaver Falls was originally called Brighton. So there's a reason why there is so much commonality here, because they were connected. And the same business establishments that were incorporated in Beaver Falls obviously made its way into here. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about water routes here throughout this Beaver County here. These are water towns: New Brighton, Bridgewater, Beaver, Rochester, Freedom, Mecca, all water towns. And there's reasons for that. And the reason why we have the industries that we had before the steel industry took place was primarily because of these water routes. Even during the Civil War days, New Brighton was a transfer point for many of the Union soldiers as far as to Lake Erie, if you will. And the reason for that is, of course, the way to travel in those days was by canal and by water. And this is precisely what New Brighton, look at that beautiful church. This is what New Brighton was known for. A very well-developed water route town. What is the motto of Beaver County? Divided by its waters and united by its people, right? Well, there you have it. Look at those beautiful flowers that are still in full bloom. As we're driving on 8th Avenue here, some more older homes that are still taking a pleasant shape in their old age. A lot of them have been refurbished, redone, remodeled, and it looks grand. So New Brighton had a lot to offer. It was originally settled by English and Western Europeans who had a dream of settling this town by means of business establishments. And that, ladies and gentlemen,